This episode is brought to you by Google Gemini. With the Gemini app, you can talk live and have a real-time conversation with an AI assistant. It's great for all kinds of things, like if you want to practice for an upcoming interview, ask for advice on things to do in a new city, or brainstorm creative ideas. And by the way, this script was actually read by Gemini. Download the Gemini app for iOS and Android today. Must be 18 plus to use Gemini Live.
This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like you know to check the date of the big game first before you accidentally buy tickets on your 20th wedding anniversary and have to spend the next 20 years of your marriage making up for it. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
Why do you hate the Bible, Dan?
Well, it's because I hate God. Can't you tell?
It's all that Satan worship you've been doing.
Hey, once you pop, you can't stop. Hey, everybody, I'm Dan McClellan.
And I'm Dan Beecher.
And you're listening to the Data Over Dogma podcast, where we increase public access to the academic study of the Bible and religion, and we combat the spread of that ever-present, I forget.
Misinformation is the word you're looking for.
Misinformation of the same.
It's amazing that you would forget that particular word, because today is all about misinformation.
It's a veritable smorgas. I don't know what the word is. It's a cornucopia of misinformation.
All right, this is going to be a fun episode if Dan doesn't know how to word today. This is going to be a tricky one. But yeah, we're doing a bit of a grab bag of apologetics. I'm gonna call it, I don't know, something along the lines of my apologies. What do you think of that? Should we do that?
Yes, that works.
Yeah, because it is. We're going to be talking about a lot. Look, there are plenty of fine apologetics out there. There are plenty of ways of looking at the stories of the Bible and harmonizing them with your worldview and whatever. There are also some really, really bad ways of them, yeah, trying to take what's in the Bible and mold it to what we actually know about the world around us. And it doesn't always work.
Yeah, it's highly problematic, and mostly because and a friend of mine on Facebook was a scholar friend of mine was talking about this yesterday. You've heard the term exegesis, and then we also talk about isogesis. One is
explain them both.
Okay, so exegesis, the idea would be interpretation out of. You're reading from, you're basically trying to figure out what the text means. Eisegesis would be reading into, you're putting stuff into the text. And the concern that my scholar friend was expressing was the notion that these were a strict dichotomy, because there's not, because there's no such thing as pure exegesis, because we're not just extracting meaning from a text. You are generating meaning with the text, something that I have harped on many times. And so all interpretation is eisegesis to one degree or another. And so when all engagement with the text to one degree or another is remaking the text in our own image, the difference is, what are our concerns and our goals and our methodologies? Are we trying to reconstruct the text in a way that we think is going to most closely approximate what the original authors and audiences would have understood, or are we trying to construct meaning in a way that serves our own interests today? And this is something that I point out in the introduction to my forthcoming book, The Bible Says So.
Gosh, you're good at squeezing that in. That's awesome. Pre-orders available now.
Yeah. What we get right and wrong about Scripture's most controversial issues. Coming out April 29th, 2025.
Link in the show notes, baby. Everybody pre-order. We want this thing on the New York Times bestseller list. We want to rocket this to stardom.
Yeah, we want it coming out number one. But one of the things I point out is that if you are not willing to let the Bible mean something that you disagree with, then you're not really concerned for the Bible. You're just concerned for the Bible as a proof text. You just want it to be the authorization for your own dogmas. And that's what bad apologetics, that's the foundation of bad apologetics. It's where really you're only attempting to perform a concern for context or history or textual things like that. It's a performance. You want to make it look like you are concerned for all those things, but in reality, the Bible is not allowed to contradict your dogmas. And we're going to see a bunch of ways that apologetics does that in today's show.
Indeed. So let's pick. Let's start at the very beginning. It's a very good place to start. In Genesis, one of the things that you proposed to me as we were looking through ideas that we could explore today,
it was an indecent proposal, one might say.
Indeed, but, it is ways that certain Bible translations can fudge the translation to harmonize what they think the book is supposed to be saying, rather than to present what the book actually says.
Yes.
Is that a fair description of what we're looking at here?
Yeah, I think that's a fair description. We're talking about Genesis 2, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, and this kind of came up because of some videos that I made recently. One of them, I was talking about the difference between the creation account in Genesis 1 and then the creation account in Genesis 2 and 3. These are two entirely different creation accounts. One, and we've talked at length about this. In fact, I think our very first show talked about the differences between these two creation accounts. But
that's right.
Inevitably, there was pushback from folks who suggest that they are one and the same narrative and that they are entirely harmonious.
Yeah.
And that we just need to stop hating the Bible and just succumb to the dulcet tones of their harmony. And
why do you hate the Bible, Dan?
Well, it's because I hate God. Can't you tell?
It's all that Satan worship you've been doing.
Once you pop, you can't stop. So, and this comes from the main verse I want to talk about is Genesis 2:19, but also Genesis 2:8 is a companion verse to this, because there was a video that was made. It actually, I don't think it was responding to me. I think it was responding to a comment from another comment on my video or something like that. But the person said that the notion that these two texts contradict is a product of a misunderstanding or a mistranslation or misinterpretation of Genesis 2:19. And in the Hebrew, Genesis 2:19 is just carrying on the narrative of God's creation of the earth. So we have God taking the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to till it and keep it, and the Lord God commanded the man, you know all that stuff. It is not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helper as his partner. And then Genesis 2:19 says, so out of the ground the Lord God formed every animal of the field and every bird of the air and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called every living creature, that was its name. And this is an attempt to find a suitable companion, an Ezer Kenegdo helpmeet for Adam, and it fails. God is like, back to the drawing board. What if I just tore a piece of his flesh off? Yeah. And that's where we get woman. But if you go look at the NIV and the ESV, two translations with which we have quibbled.
This is the New International Version and the English Standard Version.
Right. And funny enough, the English Standard Version exists because the people were, certain white men were like, hey, the NIV is too woke. Although they used whatever they would have used for woke back in the 90s.
Right.
But the New International Version in verse 19 says, and here's the reason this is a bad thing, because according to Genesis 2, God creates Adam, then creates all the animals.
Right.
But in Genesis 1, the animals are created before humanity is created. Right. So we've got a pretty clear contradiction. Genesis 2:19 in the New International Version says, now the Lord God had formed out of the ground all the wild animals and all the birds in the sky.
We're getting down to the minutia again. We're hinging on a single word again. But
yes, a helper verb, had, which communicates in the English what is known as the pluperfect tense, where instead of just talking about a simple past tense, we are talking about a past that is anterior to the past tense, called the pluperfect. The idea being, this creation of the animals had already taken place before the story we're telling you right now, and so there's no contradiction. The problem is that is not a valid translation of the verb form at the beginning of this verse. It's what's called the wayik tol verb form, or some people call it the imperfect verb form. Some people call it the prefix verb form. It's a way to say it's incompleted action, but because of its form, it's kind of thrown in the past tense. And this is part of, in Hebrew, what's called past time narrative sequence. When you're telling a story in Hebrew, it goes, this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and thus and so. But if you want to interrupt it to provide some background information, like a pluperfect thing, now he had done this, then what you would do is you would interrupt that sequence of wayik tol verbs with what's called a katal verb, which is the perfect, the completed action, the affix form, whatever you want to call it.
I don't want to call it any of those things.
That's fair. That's totally fair. Neither do any of the students I've ever taught Hebrew, but that is how you would indicate a pluperfect, but we don't have that here.
Okay.
And we do have it in Genesis 2:8, oddly enough, because Genesis 2:8 says, and the Lord God, Adonai Elohim, planted a garden in the east, in Eden, and there he put the man he had formed. So the formation of Ha'adam, the human, occurred before the planting of this garden. And if you look in the Hebrew, it's the wayik tol at the beginning of the verse, and then it's the katal, that interruption of the past time narrative sequence to indicate this has an anteriority to the current narrative.
So so what that means is that's putting the creation of Adam before planting the garden.
Yes, which is another contradiction.
Yes. Right.
If you go look at the beginning of Genesis 2, Genesis 2:4b is where this creation account begins. In the day that Adonai Elohim made the earth and the heavens, verse 5, when no plant of the field was yet in the earth and no vegetation of the field had yet sprung up, for Adonai Elohim had not caused it to rain upon the earth, and there was no one to till the ground, but a stream would rise from the earth and water the whole face of the ground. And then God makes the human, and then God plants a garden in Eden, and there places the human that he had created.
Right.
And because of this issue, because Genesis 1 also says plants were on the earth before humanity as well, guess what the NIV does? Translates Genesis 2:8 as a pluperfect as well, but not the second verb. Well, it does translate the second verb as a pluperfect, but also the first. So in the NIV, it says, now the Lord God had planted a garden in the east, in Eden, and there he put the man he had formed.
They're both. He had done all of this. He likes to front load the effort. And then just plonk it all in.
There's a lot of resumption, a lot of reflection, a lot of allusion backwards to things that are nowhere described in the text.
Right.
Well, except for in Genesis 1. And so the NIV, even like, you don't get a pluperfect from a wayik tol verb. You get a pluperfect from interrupting a wayik tol verb with a katal verb. And then in verse 8, they're just like, there is a wayik tol verb that is interrupted by a katal verb. And they're like, no. Both of them are pluperfect. So it's like, well, there's no interruption with the wayik tol, and then the interruption with the katal you're interpreting as carrying on the same sense as the wayik tol. So it's doubly stupid. Yeah. But the NIV's priority, as like it explicitly says in the introduction, is the inspiration the inerrancy, the univocality, the historicity of the text. That is their priority.
Right.
What the text says is secondary.
Yeah.
Which is the biggest problem with all this. It's like you want what the text says. Sola scriptura. The text is all that matters. The text. But then you're telling the text what you're telling the text what it is and is not allowed to say. So in reality, it's your tradition that is the authority, and the text is just the proof text, and it's going to say what you tell it to say.
Right.
And in this case, you're telling it not to contradict Genesis 1 because it do contradict Genesis 1.
Yeah, it just feels so I mean, I understand the impulse. When this book contradicts itself, that feels really scary if you've already decided that this book isn't allowed to contradict itself.
Yeah.
It feels obvious to me, though, that the answer to that is to just like deal with your emotions about the contradictions rather than like fixing it, which is not like, that's not what they think they're doing. Like, they think they're honoring it in some way, but really all they're honoring is their sort of emotional discomfort.
Yeah. And then you've got a bunch of scholars who will then go out in search of arguments that the Wayik can communicate the pluperfect or the past perfect sense.
Right.
And so there are publications that are like, we're certain that this can communicate the pluperfect. And then there are other scholars who are just saying, no, it doesn't.
No.
And so all they bring up a handful of examples, and all of them are contested by other scholars.
Right.
There are other scholars are like, yeah, no, that doesn't have to be read as a pluperfect. None of that works. But it shows that apologetics is not about following the data where the data lead. It's certainly not about giving priority to what the text says. Apologetics is always about defending a predetermined conclusion, defending a dogma against the data.
Right.
Saying the data doesn't stop us from arriving at our predetermined conclusion. Right. You can't prove it's impossible. And there's that ginning up of the tiniest little sliver of not impossible where apologetics lives and breathes and has its being.
Yeah.
So that's a particularly bad one.
I feel like one of the interesting things about this particular thing, Genesis 2,
mm-hmm.
and these pluperfect moments, is that it makes it so clear how utterly unqualified all of us who aren't you and the people that we talked to at SBL, like. Mm-hmm. The rest of us are completely unqualified to make comment on this. It's like we literally, so many people are like, I don't have to listen to the experts, so-called experts about things because I could do my own research. No, you can't. Unless you like learn as much ancient Hebrew as you know, Dan. Like, and I'm not willing to devote as much of my life to this study as you are. Like, it's just not, you pursued multiple degrees in it, and I'm not going to be doing that. So we all have to find figure out which experts we believe.
Yeah.
Or what it makes it a very difficult pursuit.
And the same is true of the experts. Yeah. Like none of us are capable of gathering the experiences and the resources and the data and the training to be able to drill down to the bedrock of every single argument related to every single issue related to the Bible. At some point, even the people who are the most expert in certain fields are just relying on the judgment of other experts. And for folks who don't know these languages or the secondary literature or the archaeological or the textual or the other data very well at all, they're just unilaterally relying on the judgment of other experts. And so it's always going to come down to who you're going to accept as an expert. And so, yeah, that's a reality for all of us. And so, yeah, but the folks out there on YouTube and in the TikTok comments sections and Instagram and Blue Sky and Threads and what Mastodon, is that still a thing? What the folks out there who are like, well, I just have to read the text. So you can't read a single syllable of the text until one of those experts has translated it for you, and you are relying entirely on their ability to accurately translate it. And,
right.
And all the arguments from the translation are just appeals to the authority of the translator until you can drill down to that bedrock, which very few people have the ganas, have the desire, the resources, the time, or the interest in acquiring. So we have a problem, is what we have. Those of us who do want to be able to drill down to the bedrock of all of this.
Hey, it's Austin James. If you're like me, trying to live your best life while living with diabetes, you can relate to worrying if you're doing a good job managing your diabetes. I use the Freestyle Libre 3 Plus sensor to get real-time glucose readings and see the impact of every meal and activity to make better decisions. The Freestyle Libre 3 Plus sensor can help me live life with diabetes on my own terms, and it gives me more time for the things I love, like being a dad and a musician. Now this is progress. Learn more at freestylelibre.us.
For prescription only. Safety info found at freestylelibre.us.
This episode is brought to you by AWS. Amazon Q Business is the new generative AI assistant from AWS. Many tasks can make business slow, like wading through mud. Help! Luckily, there's a faster, easier, less messy choice. Amazon Q can securely understand your business data to help you streamline tasks, like summarizing quarterly results or doing complex analyses in no time. Q got this. Learn what Amazon Q Business can do for you at aws.com/learn more.
So, speaking of expertise, let's move on to another thing in which neither of us has any expertise. Not you nor I. Mm-hmm. Let's go to NASA.
NASA. Doesn't that mean to deceive in Hebrew?
I'm pretty sure it does. Or at very least, I've definitely seen it claimed that the word NASA. I mean, do you want to just answer that really quickly since we're on it?
Yeah. So, no, it doesn't mean to deceive. There is a verbal root that a lot of people will look this up in like Strong's Concordance or something like that, which anybody who it's what I give out every year for Christmas to all my friends and family. But people will look it up, and they will look for words that mean deceive, and they will see NASA, and they will think, aha! Although what they will entirely ignore is the diacritics on these letters, including a little chevron above the S, a downward-facing kind of arrow caret shape.
Yeah.
That indicates that is not pronounced S, like S, it's pronounced SH. Shh. So nasha is a verbal root that can mean deceive, but only when it occurs in a particular verbal stem. And in Hebrew, like in English, we have these helper verbs, had, did, caused to, like all these different ways to give nuance to our verbs. In Hebrew, you actually change the word itself. And so one of these stems, the causative stem, turns a verb from to do into cause to do. So like the verb to see, if you put it in the causative, it would be cause to see, and we would translate it as show or something like that.
Sure.
So nasha only means to deceive in the causative stem. But in order to put it in the causative, you actually have to change the letters. You add a hey to the beginning, and with a verbal root that begins with a noon, like nasha, that creates a consonant cluster with the first two consonants, and the noon actually assimilates to the sh sound and becomes a second sh sound. And long story short, when this verb is used to mean deceive, it's not NASA. Has never been NASA, but it's not even nasha. It sounds completely different. The vowels change as well. So in Genesis 3, where people say, well, that's what Eve says in Genesis 3, when the serpent deceived me, beguiled me, tricked me, that's NASA. No, the verb there is hishiani. He deceived me. And that's so basically, people who say NASA means deceive don't have the first clue what they're talking about.
I feel like don't have the first clue what we're talking about is going to be a theme.
It is going to be the through line, yes, of so much of apologetics, and particularly the bad apologetics.
So the claim that we're looking at, the specific NASA claim, isn't about NASA deceiving, but is really about believing NASA.
It is. When the claims of NASA support your dogmas, then they are the most authoritative voice in the discussion. And here it has to do with when Jesus was crucified. Because some people will go onto a website, gsfc.nasa.gov, and there's a page, NASA Eclipse website, and there's a page that has lunar eclipses of historical interest, and they'll share the screenshot of this list of lunar eclipses of historical interest, and one of them is April 3rd, 33 CE. And in the description of the event on this page, there's it says crucifixion of Christ? Question mark. And so people are like, NASA has confirmed Jesus' crucifixion.
Right.
And then they'll go to the accounts of the crucifixion where it says it got dark for 3 hours.
Right.
And most of them, it's noon to 3 p.m. The Gospel of John actually places the crucifixion earlier than that. But we ignore that because we're trying to nasha some the folks out there. But anyway, they say, well, this eclipse probably is why it got dark for 3 hours. Now, what's the first thing that jumps out at you here?
I feel like you used a word early in this moment in this description,
an adjective
that might shed some not light that might shed some darkness on this thing.
Not enough to make the earth dark, but
no,
yes.
You said it was lunar eclipses. Did you
It's
not?
a lunar eclipse. Yes. And every time they show the screenshot, it says in big bold letters on the very top of the screenshot, lunar eclipses.
I mean, lunar eclipses are cool and all, but like, it's not going to make it dark in the middle of the day. Because that's not how eclipses of the moon work.
Right.
So that's
it's
an
not
issue.
Going to happen in the middle of the day either.
No. It just and also like I do, first of all, looking for a scientific explanation for what is overtly meant to be miraculous.
Yes.
Seems backwards to me.
Well,
it seems like the exact opposite of what you want to be doing.
But
you want there to be no scientific explanation.
Right. But it's what we have been doing since the 19th century. Because since the Enlightenment, there's been the scientific method has gained an awful lot of authority and has made an awful lot of advances, and people live longer, and we have medicine, and we put a man on yon moon because of science. And in the 19th century, when people started scratching their heads about the age of the earth and about evolution and things like that, it put the religious community on their heels because it was like, whoa, we got to respond to all of this science. And what they did was adopt the scientific method in response and say, well, wait, whoa. We can use science to prove this. It's a way to try to beat them at their own game, and not because they wanted to, but because they had to. They had no other choice. And so, ever since the mid 19th century, it has been the goal has been to show that these things are rational, that these things are scientifically supportable, and all of this. Because if you just punt and say, it's a miracle, we're not supposed to be able to explain it, then the other side is going to declare victory. And that is intolerable. So you have to be able to say, no, we can explain. There was a gust of wind, and the very shallow part of the Red Sea, the water was pushed back.
Right.
And that created the dry ground that allowed Moses to march across. You got to come up with naturalistic explanations to satisfy a naturalistic worldview. But
can I just say, as someone who has a naturalistic worldview, I think that's exactly the opposite of the position you should be coming from.
Yeah,
because it's so much less well, in part because we know about lunar eclipses and what they can and can't do.
There's not a lot of wiggle room.
Even if it was a solar eclipse, I've seen a full totality of solar eclipse. It lasts minutes. It doesn't last
max 7 minutes.
It doesn't last 3 hours, and
not less than 3 hours. No,
you're just like, you're not going to explain these things through natural means, and you shouldn't. Like, the whole point is unnatural things happened here, and that's and therefore we can attribute them to a supernatural cause. It just seems so weird and backwards to me.
I think it is, but a lot of apologetics is, well, one, the main goal of apologetics is not to convince skeptics. The main goal of apologetics is to make the people who already agree with you feel validated.
Yes.
Because if they can think, because they're on edge, they're like, I have this belief. I'm not sure the data support my belief, and you've got to make a case. And as I've stated many times before, usually all it requires is ginning up the tiniest little sliver of not impossible, because that gives them an opening. That gives them that little tiny space where they can live, breathe, and have their being of at least it's not impossible. And that's the main goal of apologetics. Now, it has to perform validity within the broader academic world, but it just has to perform it for its audience that does not know the broader academic world well enough to know if these arguments are valid. And for those of you who don't know, a lunar eclipse is where the sun is, the Earth is in between the sun and the moon.
Right.
And so the sun is shining on the Earth and casting a shadow on the moon. And so what you're seeing is the moon with a shadow going across it.
Right. With the Earth's shadow, which happens to
be much bigger,
subsume it.
Yes. And then the solar eclipse is where the moon is in between the Earth and the sun. And then, the moon actually exactly matches the size of the sun when it crosses in front of it.
That's a fun little coinkydink. I love that.
Yeah. And so the other thing that to know about this particular lunar eclipse is that in Jerusalem, it started around 6:20 p.m.
Right.
Because lunar eclipses usually happen in the evening. Well, they happen in the evening or at nighttime or in the early morning. And so this was not at noon. No. This was not, didn't last until 3 p.m. It was in the evening, and there was, things were already getting dark. So it did not cause any unusual darkness.
That's a good way to explain 3 hours of darkness is nighttime. If you want a naturalistic reason why it might be dark for 3 hours,
nightfall.
That's a good one.
That just makes me think of the PJ Masks opening sequence, but that's for another time and place. What were you about to say?
I have no idea. Let's move on to our next thing.
Well, I just want to point out one other thing, though, before we go. Some people are like, well, maybe there was a solar eclipse. Okay, well, then the Gospels are all wrong.
Yeah.
Because the Gospels say that Jesus was crucified on the Passover. And the Passover is the new moon. And here's a little thing about the new moon. The new moon is when the moon is on the other side of the earth from the sun. It is literally and physically impossible to have a solar eclipse on the Passover. It's the exact opposite of the new moon. So if there was a solar eclipse that caused darkness for 20 times the physically possible length of a solar eclipse, it didn't happen at the Passover. And so the Gospels are all entirely wrong about when Jesus was crucified. So
pick your thing, what you think the Gospels are wrong about. Just go ahead and choose which one.
Yeah. If you're trying to come up with a naturalistic explanation for this.
All right. Well, I think that's a good moment for us to move into another weird claim
There are more of them?
Look, we could just do a separate podcast entirely about weird apologetic claims, and maybe we should.
Fair enough.
But we're not doing that just yet.
Okay.
Right now, we're just going to focus on a few other things.
Okay.
Let's go to Isaiah. The book of Isaiah, chapter 40. Here's the thing. 40. For a long time in the world, it's been a while since this was the case, but for a long time in the world, the earth was assumed to be a plane, a flat plane.
Yes.
Now, the idea,
or at
of
least
the
that
earth,
was the conventional wisdom. We have evidence of awareness that things are of a spherical nature, going back to probably the middle of the first millennium BCE, but not widespread knowledge of this.
Right. Yeah, and that was Greece. That's its own right. We're talking. I mean, that was the first.
Yeah. These are philosophers, the original, the OGs of the natural sciences, who were measuring things and being like, "Well, that's peculiar."
That's
and coming up with a round Earth, but that's not widespread knowledge.
Right. So I think we can assume safely, though it's not 100% clear, that the authors of the Bible, particularly the Hebrew Bible, were assuming a flat earth. And, if you look at the Genesis description of the earth, you look at a flat, it's basically, because they've got that darn dome. The sky is a dome.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about that. The earth is, it's got land and water and a dome over it, and then more water on the other side of the dome. Am I right about that?
Yeah. In most of the creation accounts from ancient West Asia, creation is basically a process of separation between amidst chaotic waters, the primordial chaotic soup. There's a separation, and one thing that needs to happen is dry land needs to appear. And that either happens from the receding of the waters, or it happens through the rising of the dry land. But one thing that you need for either of those things happen is for space to be between the waters. And so in the Hebrew Bible, this happens, the waters of creation are already there. And God creates a rakia, which comes from a verb that means to hammer or flatten out. And the idea is, think of hammering out like a metal bowl or something like that. And this rakia appears there, and God actually creates it. God says, "Let there be," and then instead of just saying, "and there was a rakia," God makes the rakia. And this suspends the waters above from the waters below. And this creates the space, and then later on you have the separation of the waters, you have the appearance of the dry land. But that rakia is basically a large crystalline dome. This is why it's blue and shiny and sparkly, and the waters above are suspended above. And then you have the waters beneath recede, and you have the dry land. And this is where the idea of Leviathan or Rahab or the sea, the dragon, the archaic battle between God and the sea monster are kind of a metaphorical representation of God's restraining of the waters of creation, which allow the dry land to appear. But what you have here in the ancient West Asian conceptualization of the earth is this notion that there's more or less flat, dry land. There are mountains on it, but more or less it's flat, and it's more or less circular in shape. And then beyond the dry land are seas, which also are more or less circular in shape. And at the edge of the seas, you have the edge of the dome. So think of Truman Show. If you take a boat out there far enough, you're going to clunk into the side.
Just going to bonk.
Yeah. And that's going to be where the dome meets the seas, and then it's going to go straight up, and you got the skies above. And so this Earth, the land, was thought to be flat. And here in
not that it ever says the word flat in reference to the Earth.
No. We I think this is a situation where to talk about a flat Earth, you got to have a concept of a round Earth,
right?
Because otherwise, you're it's just the Earth. You don't have to qualify it unless there's an alternative.
Yeah.
Okay, I have to tell you, I was just looking on eBay where I go for all kinds of things I love, and there it was.
That hologram trading card. One of the rarest, the last one I needed for my set. Shiny like the
designer handbag of my dreams. One of a kind. eBay had it, and now everyone's asking, ooh, where'd you get your
windshield wipers? eBay has all the parts that fit my car. No more annoying, just beautiful.
Whatever you love, find it on eBay. eBay, things people love.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in places that could expose you to identity theft. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, their US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
It's so funny to me, as you say, like it's been millennia that some humans have known that the Earth was a sphere. It's been hundreds of years since everybody agreed that the Earth was a sphere, and yet it does seem like there definitely is a group of people who have sprung up who don't like that idea.
Yeah.
And want to and it feels like a lot of them, when I've drilled down on the flat Earth people, very many of them are again trying to justify what they read into their Bible reading.
Yeah. Or it's a part of some conspiracy theory where the government is hiding everything from them. And because I think they fantasize about this being the Truman Show, and they enjoy being part of a community that kind of enjoys the effervescence of this asinine conspiracy theory.
Right.
But
however, there is a counter to that theory, theoretically a counter to it, from the Bible itself. There are people who say, nah, the Bible also disputes the flat Earth.
Right.
And that's where we get to Isaiah 40.
Yes, and this is part of the apologetic that the Bible is inerrant. And so even in matters scientific, it's going to be accurate. Therefore, the Bible promotes a globular, a spherical notion of the earth. And thus we turn in the Word to Isaiah chapter 40, verse 22. And this is part of Deutero-Isaiah, which we have talked about recently, second Isaiah, probably written in the late 6th or 5th century BCE. And we have Isaiah referring to the circle of the earth. It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them like a tent to live in. So this is talking about God, obviously.
Yeah.
And we have some people who say this word circle, chug, in Hebrew, means globe or sphere.
Yeah. No, it doesn't. Just not for nothing, but like the word circle is, we have two words for a reason. I suppose a translator could just use a word that means sphere and just say circle, but that seems weird. But yeah, so go on with what you're saying.
Yeah, so this word occurs, I think, 3 total times in the Hebrew Bible. Isaiah 40, verse 22, Job 22, verse 14, and Proverbs 8, 27. And if you look this up in a lexicon, it's going to probably talk about a circle that would be drawn with a compass, because you get it. The noun occurs anyway 3 times. You have a verb that means to describe a circle, and in which one is it? I think, yes, Proverbs 8:27. It uses the verbal root chuk, chuk and chug, 2 different words.
Okay.
Chuk means to inscribe or decree, and in this at the end of Proverbs 8:27 it says, in his inscribing of a chug upon the face of the deep. And the idea is the inscription of a circle, like you might use a compass to create. In other words, it's a flat circle,
Right.
and it is being inscribed upon the deep, basically to delineate that the waters where the dome is going to encapsulate them.
Sure.
In this circular shape, and so you don't draw a globe on the waters, on the top of the waters, the face of the waters. You draw a flat circle. Yeah. And so chug, if you look it up in, for instance, the Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament, probably the most commonly used lexicon for the Hebrew Bible, it refers to chug haaretz, the circle of the earth, and it says the earth conceived as a disk. So very clearly, this is in agreement with the broader notion that the earth represents a flat, circular-shaped plane on which we have dry ground and water.
It's the disk dome theory of Earth shaping.
Yep.
So there you go.
You got to imagine a snow globe, and you've got a little circle of land and some little mountains poking up in that little circle of land, and then around it is the waters.
Yeah.
And then over it, you've got this glass dome, and then you just go and shake it when the people start looking at naughty magazines and things like that, because there's nothing worse than that.
Or every now and then you got to just open up the water, the dome, and let the waters come in and just drown everybody, and then suck it back out. And
we're starting all over. We're starting from scratch.
Well, and finally, I want to bring us back to Genesis. All the answers are in Genesis.
All roads lead back to Genesis, ultimately. Yes.
Where in the 4th chapter thereof, there's a moment where anyone who's like reading for the first time and kind of paying attention, everyone just goes, hang on, what? And that is
baking powder. Excuse me.
We've got Adam, we've got Eve. They have a few kids, and then
two children.
Kids, yes,
exactly.
Yeah, they have Cain and Abel, couple guys, and then suddenly, wives show up. Talk a bit about that. Let's just dive into that.
So, chapter 4, verse 1 begins, the man knew his wife, Eve, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, and this is the NRSV UE, I have produced a man with the help of the Lord. And you mentioned that the NIV, that you ran across something where the NIV had a different rendering. What is the
the NIV say? On that, let me find it. Hang on. I think NIV says, with the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man.
Yeah.
But I don't think that the word help is in there, is it?
No, the word help is not in there. In fact, it's pretty short in Hebrew. Vatomer, and she said, Kaniti ish et Adonai, which kaniti is the first common singular katal, there's that word again, form of the verbal root kana, which is generally associated with acquisition. You buy, you purchase, you receive, you get something. But there are scholars out there. I have argued this. I have a friend who has argued in print directly against this and directly against me, that it never has a procreative nuance, or at least it doesn't mean to create. whether or not it has a procreative nuance. But this verb occurs in Ugaritic as well, and there are certain times when it seems to mean procreate. And so she probably is saying, I have procreated a man, and then et Adonai. And et here is a preposition that means with. Mm-hmm. So she says, I have procreated a man with Adonai. And so there are...
that could be sketchy.
Yeah. Adam's like, now hold on a minute.
Although
I seem to recall being a part of this.
Later in the book, there is a moment where a woman has a child theoretically without her husband's help. We do know that Jesus...
Yes. The Holy Spirit, yes, was the Holy Dove was moving too.
Yeah.
According to the
so
words
it's
of the
not
great
unprecedented,
poet. Yes.
the idea of a woman conceiving with God rather than with her husband. But
there are scholars out there who suggest that this perhaps betrays the preservation of some kind of archaic myth where the first woman was impregnated by God through sexual intercourse. I don't think that's the consensus view. The consensus view is that the idea here is that, as with most childbirth and child rearing in the ancient world, it was so fraught with risk that any successful conception, gestation, delivery was attributed to the blessing of a deity.
Sure.
And so the idea is probably with Adonai's support and help,
right?
I have been able to get a man or procreate a man or something like that.
So even if the word for help is not in the original Hebrew,
right.
it might be elucidating the actual meaning of the thing.
Yeah, because
but that's a choice.
Yeah, that's definitely a choice, and that is the translator saying this is the direction we're going here.
I just noticed that NRSV UE also uses the word help in there.
Yep, it does. And so literally you would say whatever she has done with Adonai. So with Adonai I've brought forth a man or something like that. But, that lends itself to some other interpretations.
Sure.
But while I was a scripture translation supervisor for the LDS Church, our mantra was maintain the ambiguity. The idea being it is better to default to an ambiguous reading rather than make a choice and one, restrict the options that the reader has,
right?
But two, perhaps make the wrong choice.
Yeah.
So. But anyway, we have Cain, then we have Abel. Now, it mentions the conception of Cain. Never says she then conceived Abel. It says later she gave birth to, or next she bore his brother Abel. And Yalad, to bear, is actually the process of delivering the child.
Oh, okay.
So there is a reading out there that she conceived twins and then first gave birth to Cain and then later gave birth to Abel.
Oh, interesting.
But they grow up and as brothers do, they fought.
Yeah.
And in short, Cain murdered Abel.
Yeah.
And then God is like, what the hell did you do that for?
I only have two of you. What are you doing?
And God in verse 11, now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. Blah, 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 blah. And then Cain says, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Today you have driven me away from the soil. I shall be hidden from your face, and I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and anyone who meets me may kill me. And here's where a thoughtful reader is going, anyone?
There's two other
the
people.
Three of you, yeah. You killed the fourth guy. You
It's your
reduced
mom
the
and your
world's
dad.
population by 25%.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you know everybody on the planet.
But
we
any
don't
of
know
them
how
could kill you.
And we don't know how Eve feels about this, but maybe that's what he meant. Mom's going to kill me. And then God says, no. Whoever kills Cain will suffer a sevenfold vengeance. And Adonai put a mark on Cain so that no one who came upon him would kill him.
Right.
And this has nothing to do with... Let's
not get into the mark of Cain. There's a whole...
No, we're not going to... We got to do the curse of Ham, mark of Cain stuff at some point. Take a note. Yeah,
I'm writing it down right now. Anyway,
and then in verse 16 says, Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. So there's a land that's named Nod, evidently. And then the very next verse says, Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch, and he built a city. And named it Enoch after his son Enoch. So Cain was evidently married.
Yeah.
And then his son builds his son a city. And so again, the thoughtful reader is going, they seem to be presupposing an already inhabited world.
Yeah. Very much like there's a land of seemingly people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we have all these people being born, and Ada bore Jabal. He was the ancestor of those who live in tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the ancestor of all those who play the lyre and pipe. So we've got a bunch of different people who seem to be ideological ancestors of these different disciplines and industries and things like that. But yeah, it seems very clear. And then Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice, you wives of Lamech. Listen to what I say. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. Like there are people around. So I made a video a bit ago where I said, hey, why does the author of Genesis 4 seem to presuppose an inhabited world, whereas Genesis 2 and 3 seem to describe Adam and Eve as the only humans on the entire planet? They are the first humans to exist, and that's it. And the answer is that these are two separate traditions. One, the Adam and Eve tradition in the Garden of Eden, that's the creation of humanity. Genesis 4, this is a separate tradition. Whether it's earlier or later, I don't know. But these are people who live in an inhabited world. And so Cain is worried because there are other people out there, and word spreads fast in small towns. And so he's worried about other people killing. And he's got a wife because, he's got a wife. You took a wife when you became an adult in that time and place. And so they contradict each other in that regard. And an awful lot of people just can't accept that. And so I had a bunch of comments that said, Dan, you ignorant slut. Adam and Eve had a bunch of other kids. It says it in the text. Incest wasn't a problem, and this always gets into these problematic notions of pure bloodlines and stuff like that.
It's so funny to like the idea that like, oh, I'm very uncomfortable with two different stories being merged together in a way that doesn't quite make sense, but I'm much more comfortable with like a whole lot of incest until the place is like densely populated. Like that's more comfortable to you?
Yeah. And the argument is that the bloodlines were pure. They had not yet been corrupted by something.
Right.
By
DNA?
Sometimes it's the flood after the flood, the atmosphere was dirtier or something. I don't know. Some people think that the B'nai Elohim, the children of God in Genesis 6, these people corrupted the bloodlines. They introduced impure blood. And so, again, wildly problematic arguments, but not supported by any data. And Genesis 4 actually directly refutes that argument. Because here's what happens in verse 25. So we had Ha'adam, the human, knew his wife. They did the horizontal mambo. And then we had Cain and Abel.
Right.
Verse 25 says, Adam knew his wife again. So in Hebrew, that's od. It happened again. And she bore a son and named him Seth. And this means appointed. For she said, God has appointed for me another child instead of Abel because Cain killed him.
Right.
In other words, God has replaced the child that I lost because they're like pairs of genes. When you lose one, you just get another. But the text is pretty clearly indicating that the birth of Seth represents the third child in toto that Adam and Eve have had.
Right.
And Seth is the replacement of Abel.
And that scripture comes after Cain has gotten has met all of these other people and blah blah blah.
And Cain has already had a bunch of kids, and his kids have had kids and all that in the narrative.
And immediately after that, Seth has a son.
Yeah, Enoch.
So, and unless that son was born to his mama, that means I think we're meant to assume that Seth also gets a wife.
Yeah. And if we go on to Genesis 5, and Genesis 5 is, again, probably from another source. But if you want to read this all, if you're arguing this is all univocal, this is all one continuous narrative, Genesis 5, verse 3, when Adam had lived 130 years, he became the father of a son in his likeness according to his image and named him Seth. So basically, Adam was 130 years old when his third child was born, Seth.
Right.
The days of Adam after he became the father of Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. So this is that explicit mention that Adam had other sons and daughters. And it is after the birth of Seth. The birth of Seth occurred after the death of Abel. Right. So according to the narrative, these things all happen sequentially, consecutively. And in between child number 2 and child number 3, Cain has a wife.
Yeah.
And Cain goes off to the land of Nod. Cain is afraid of strangers. Cain builds a city. Like all this stuff goes on when there should be a grand total of 3 people on the planet. So the text does not leave room for Adam and Eve to just be, doing it like they do on the Discovery Channel.
Right.
And just generating all these other people for his children to marry and raise children with. So it's another situation where the text is not the authority. The text is not the most important thing here. The most important thing is the dogma. The text is secondary. We will tell the text what it is and is not allowed to say because the text is just there to facilitate our dogmas. And that's what apologetics is doing with Genesis 4.
All right. Well, I'm sure we're going to get some emails,
some lovely messages,
some comments in the comments section over on YouTube, etc. But thank you, Dan. The apologists are mad, and
the apologists are always mad.
That's kind of their thing. But yes, if you friends appreciated these counter apologetics. Then please feel free to become a patron of our show over on Patreon. You can do that where you can get a early and ad-free version of every episode of the show, as well as you can gain access to the after party, where that's bonus content every week that we make just for our $10 a month and over patrons. That would be patreon.com/Data Over Dogma. If you'd like to write into us with your angry emails, then write to somebody else. But if you want to write into us about anything else, go ahead and email us at contact@dataoverdogma.com, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Bye, everybody.
Data Over Dogma is a member of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. It is a production of Data Over Dogma Media, LLC, copyright 2024, all rights reserved.
If you like this podcast, can we recommend another one? It's called Big Picture Science. You can hear it wherever you get your podcasts, and its name tells part of the story. The big picture questions and the most interesting research in science.
Seth and I are the hosts. Seth is a scientist. I am Molly, and I'm a science journalist. And we talk to people smarter than us, and we have fun along the way. The show is called Big Picture Science, and as Seth said, you can hear it wherever you get your podcasts.
Are you earning and investing in the stock market? In real estate? How about in relationships? Are you earning and investing in your life? I'm Doc G, semi-retired hospice physician and host of the Earn and Invest podcast, where we have the 201 or next level conversations about money and life. Not only how you make money and grow it, but also how you use your wealth to create a better and more fulfilling existence. Join us every Monday and Thursday wherever you listen to fine podcasts.
Do you find it hard to sleep at night? Then the Sleep Cove podcast can help you. Hi, I'm Christopher Fitton, the voice and clinical hypnotherapist behind Sleep Cove. Sleep Cove features sleep hypnosis, meditations, and bedtime stories, all designed to help those of you who struggle at night to achieve a restful and peaceful night's sleep. Search for Sleep Cove on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and see why Sleep Cove helps millions of people sleep deeply all night long.